Welcome back to the Personal Finance Project. I am Scott Bartosh, joined today by Hannah Gowdy. Today, Greg Ashcroft is doing some work for once, so we're going to take care of the pod today. Our thoughts were, as we were looking at topics that might be of interest to our clients, almost everybody that works with us is retired or about to retire. So a big focus of the work that we do is helping people examine that transition from working to closing in on separation from service and then entering that true retirement phase.
And most of these clients, they're 55 plus. You think you would say that's
yes.
usually the ballpark?
Sometimes we'll start talking to somebody in their late 40s, early 50s if they're just really diligent and into the process. But yeah, most people separate from service 55 or later.
But this has me thinking, Scott, what if we could retire now?
Well, and that is a very interesting thought, and it's a very popular movement. Several years ago, I would say that this really kind of came into the popular culture, this concept of financial independence, retire early, which today, and people all over the internet refer to as FIRE. And the idea here is that, there's a few different ways of thinking about what you're trying to achieve with this FIRE concept. The idea is that, work is kind of a ball and chain. And that people want
not for us.
Not for us. And we're not thinking about firing, by the way. But the work is maybe something that you have to do as opposed to something that you want to do. And so this is a movement where people are thinking about, how do I accumulate enough money or asset production so that I can stop working significantly earlier?
And even though we're not going to do this, it does sound pretty good.
Yeah.
So how would we do this?
Well, I would say there's a couple of different ways. And the first one, I'd say what you see the most in reading the FIRE websites is some people just make a ton of money. Like you got a job at a big tech firm, or you're an attorney that got, a big law job right out of college, and you do really, really well for maybe 15 years right out of college. And then by the time you're 40, you kind of look at the numbers and you're close. And one of the big things that FIRE really requires you to look at is, one, instead of planning for a 25 or 30-year retirement, we're now talking about 45, 50, 55 years, depending on what you want life expectancy to be. So this window of risk that we talk about sometimes is much larger. Because think about a 25-year period, the window of something really, really bad happening in that period, if you can get through the first 10 to 15 years without just a massive shock to that case, say you could easily spend probably 4 to 5%. We've kind of talked about, where that percentage rule comes into effect. But in a FIRE scenario where we're talking about maybe 50 years of potential retirement, you probably are going to want to spend 4 or 5%, but the risk corridor of, hey, if something goes really wrong with this plan, is a lot wider than otherwise.
And so you mentioned, some of these jobs where there is a really great earning potential. And I remember FIRE first entering my radar around the time that GameStop was really having a moment, because people were, to some extent, getting really lucky with these gambles they were making. And so there's a lot of day traders that follow this FIRE movement as well. But outside of making a lot of money, so say you want to FIRE, but you are making kind of an average amount. You're making $50,000, $60,000. How do you get to a place where you can make this happen?
Yeah, and I would say, just real quick before I kind of go into that, I was just going to touch on what you brought up, which was that this did kind of maybe enter the media and the popular culture around the time of some people turning a few $1,000s into hundreds of thousands of dollars with stuff like GameStop and these meme stocks that were popular in the pandemic era. So that's another group that maybe thought about doing this, is, all right, with either Bitcoin or some cryptocurrency or a meme stock, I've made a ton of money, so now I'm going to transition to FIRE. But to specifically go back to your question, there's another cohort, and I would say there's kind of two groups in this one. One is people talk about lean fire, and it's not saying that you have a healthy diet and you've retired earlier. It's saying that you're retiring, but you are planning to be and you want to be really frugal so that you can pull the trigger early, get out of your job, and move on to whatever's next. The other group is there's a movement called Barista FIRE, and this one is a little bit different. The idea is not that you're going to stop working entirely. It's that you are going to hang up the old corporate hat and badge and maybe suit and tie, and that what you want to do is work in a coffee shop or, work in a maybe a park somewhere, like a national park, and greet visitors. And you can kind of treat every day as a vacation in this job that pays you a little bit, but probably is not going to pay the bills if you have a extravagant lifestyle. So both of those are ways to think about, all right, maybe I never made a ton of money, but I still am really motivated by not having to work for whatever reason. What are the things that I can do? Either be really, really frugal, spend very, very little, or do some kind of job that I really enjoy to supplement the experiences and the things I want to do.
And it makes me think of, I remember reading this book called Vagabonding. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I haven't, but it sounds intriguing.
the concept is very similar. It's basically, you get a job, maybe working in a restaurant, you live really simply, you save like 6 months worth of expenses to live in a country like Thailand. And then you go and you travel until you run out of money, and then you come back and you repeat the cycle. And my dad actually came to Austin to take me to dinner, and he saw that I was reading that book. And it was right after I'd started working in the real world. And he laughed and was like, oh, this is like about the time you would read this book, because you're kind of thinking of these alternative paths to having a, 8 to 5 job. And obviously the difference there is you work until you run out of money in the six month span, where again, we talk about when you're talking through retirement, 401ks, IRAs, that's often where our clients are pulling a large portion of their money from. They have RMDs that help meet all of their expenses. But if you're young, you can't use those sources of money, or at least not as efficiently.
That's true. And I just to touch on one aspect of what you said on the vagabonding thing, I think it's pretty natural. Like if you look at history, I mean, people in various generations, they leave home and they explore a little bit before they settle down. I mean, if you kind of think maybe my era, it's gap years. I didn't take one, but people go do that and they backpack across Europe. They're maybe in the 60s and 70s, people would go to India or, on some kind of
the Peace Corps.
Peace Corps or a hippie pilgrimage, something like that. But I think it's pretty natural to want to go explore and travel and see the world. And so I think I tend to find that fire and travel really overlap a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that the vagabonding is just a really good point. But going back to the second thing you had said, if you could you refresh my memory on that point?
Yeah, well, just, you think about where our clients who are 55 plus, ultimately pull a lot of their money from.
Yep.
Right? These retirement vehicles that we're all used to contributing to. That changes if you're 35, 40, 45.
Yeah, and I would say that's even a question that we address with our clients who are retiring at 55.
Yeah.
As we've talked about before, we work with a lot of people retiring from Exxon. So you can retire and take your pension at 55. But one of the potential issues is that from 55 to the somewhat arbitrary date of 59 and a half years of age, you're not eligible to take money out of 401ks or IRAs or Roth IRAs for that matter. You can take principal, but not any growth. So part of FIRE and really retiring any amount early, if it's before 59 and a half, is looking at your assets and thinking, all right, maybe maximizing my 401k is not the most efficient thing for me. Maybe I put some into 401k because I want to get a match, or I want to get some tax-free growth on that money, or tax-deferred growth. But I need to consciously put money into CDs or after-tax investing, or some of the other stuff that Greg and I have talked about over time. ways to grow money so that you have a blended pool of assets. Because you can't use a blended pool of assets if you retire at 40. You need a very specific pool of assets that's in an after-tax account.
Yeah. And I think, we talk about the natural desire to have freedom over your time, to travel, and hopefully there are options to find careers where this is also possible. But when you think about someone who stops working at 35, what are they firing to do? What do they do with I mean, you talked about the Barista FIRE, but outside of working in a coffee shop in Italy, what are these people doing with their time?
I would say that it's pretty interesting. I think again, all this concept is, to me, it's pretty evergreen. People want to stop working, but there's so many different things that they want to do with that time. Like I mentioned before, I think travel is a big one. But one, if travel is the goal and you're not going to work at all, that can get really expensive really quickly. So if you're taking a lot of time out, out of the country that you live in, or say you're keeping a residence in the US and traveling all over the world, that you're going to need a lot of capital to make that work. I'd say another one that I've seen quite a bit is, say you get started a little bit later with a family and you get to be in your early 40s and you realize, what, this is the most important 10 years of their life coming up from, 8 to 18 before they leave the house. And I'm going to fire so that I can really be there as they make that transition. I'd say that's another one that I see. But then, to be frank, I also see people who post about, I fired, now what? And so I think that that is a really important phenomenon to drill in on and say, all right, this idea appealed to you, but what are you actually doing with it? And now that you've entered it, you don't even know.
And so now we have the question of that, what are you going to do? So we talk about this. Greg talks about this in his book club segment in kind of capturing that piece of retirement. That's not just how do you make the money work, but kind of the purpose, the fulfillment aspect of being retired. So that I feel like blows that up to an even greater degree. If you're
Yeah.
35 and you have, 60 plus years left to work with and fill your time. And then also we have how you're saving the money. We also then, what about like insurance? What are these people doing? Health insurance?
I mean,
insurance for their children?
that's a huge question too, because in the US, we now have what people call Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, which is the ability to get health insurance if you are not employed. But the issue with it is that it's very challenging to get a good plan at a reasonable cost. I just the other day on the radio was hearing somebody talk about how they're on Obamacare and they pay $2,500 a month.
Wow.
Because they actually have a job, but it's a very small business and it doesn't provide healthcare. So that's another huge thing to think about. And this is something that we talk with a lot of clients about. Say you're retiring at 60. How do I bridge that gap? A lot of retirement planning is bridging. I'm not sure why we're so into bridges, but we apparently are. 60 to 65 when you are eligible for Medicare.
Yeah.
So it's not just about access to retirement money. It's not just what are you going to do? It's how do I keep myself safe and healthy and doing the things that I want to do?
Yeah. So this naturally leads me to the ways this goes really wrong. Could we spend some time maybe discussing? I mean, I don't know if on the Reddit threads you're reading, there are people who I get you can always go back to work, right? But you maybe have this huge gap in your resume. My husband's a recruiter. That's always something they're combating when trying to fill jobs, is how to explain these gaps. So how are people really getting this wrong, would you say?
I would say there's a couple of things. One is that I would say that post-COVID, the interest in super speculative investment has remained. We don't hear quite as much about it as during the height of kind of that GameStop craze and lots of really speculative tech companies doing well in 2021. But I would say that one of the ways that you can mess up this FIRE concept is getting wealthy through speculative investing and then continuing to speculatively invest and taking too big of a hit. So say you take a small amount of money and turn it into a huge one. If you keep investing in that same way, very likely you're going to turn it back into a small amount of money. And I've seen that discussed in some of these forums where, hey, I thought I could spend, $6,000 a month. Because I would say generally a lot, if you're talking about retiring in, you say your 40s, it's usually with a lower spending goal.
Yeah.
You're probably not trying to live a super extravagant lifestyle if you're wanting to retire at 42, from my experience.
Right.
But I think there is still the potential for you did really great investing really aggressively, and now you're in big trouble. And you're going to have to go back to work because, whatever call options that you picked up cashed out of the money.
Yeah.
So, and then I think beyond that, going back to the fulfillment issue, because that's something that I don't think we talk about in personal finance a lot. But, sometimes I talk with extraordinarily wealthy people that I sense are deeply unhappy. And so money is a vehicle that can solve problems, but it doesn't make you happy.
Totally.
And I think that's pretty well established. So, finding fulfillment, finding something to keep you going, the kind of the hierarchy of needs. If you have everything you want, the last thing is kind of enlightenment or
Totally.
true fulfillment.
Yeah.
And as much as, I fashion myself a philosopher on this podcast, I don't think I'm going to be able to help you with fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an individual journey a lot of the time.
Yeah. So maybe what you need to do is go on that pilgrimage to India that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And visit the Lama
Yeah.
or a monk and find out what this is all about.
And they might just tell you to go back to work.
I don't think that's what you'd expect, but they might.
They might
say, hey, you're overthinking this thing. Just go back to work.
Exactly. I think, one thing with our clients, a huge part of especially the initial meetings with them and a big worry we're quelling is this concept of running out of money. You've worked your whole life. You want to make sure you can enjoy these last few years. And as you talked about, bad outcomes early and different things that we try and structure our portfolios to avoid. I think one of my concerns, just listening to you talk about the FIRE concept, is if you are retiring with this idea you're going to spend $6,000 a month, but you're also paying $2,500 a month for insurance. There's unexpected things that happen in life all the time. Living with the burden of always having the potential to run out of money, and then this life you've hoped to achieve kind of going by the wayside and going back to work. I mean, not that I don't know if you have comments on that, but I think it's something to consider, the stress of keeping your expenses really low for a long time.
Yeah. And I would say that's a really good point, that it can be stressful and it might be tough to change gears halfway. Say you do this FIRE thing on a budget, or do the Barista FIRE for 5 years, and then you decide, what I really want is a swimming pool and a big house and acreage or something like that. It might be tough because those 5 years are gone to pick up the pieces and make it happen again. I'd say also just another interesting comment going back to the investment and the account management of somebody that's wanting to pursue this is, I would say, unless you're just phenomenally wealthy, FIRE calls for, I would say, more active management, not in terms of, well, I can't own an index fund, but in terms of I need to be really focused on what am I taking risk with and what am I not taking risk with? Because like I said before, that period that you have to cover is so long. So you very clearly need to have money that's aggressively invested to outpace inflation and grow over time, but it can't be everything.
Yeah.
Because if you have everything in that really aggressive growth, then you're going to run into a 2008 and 9 or a COVID, even though it was short, or a 2022, which, it's kind of funny. I feel like nowadays people feel like 2022 was a walk in the park. That was not very fun.
No.
That was a year where stocks and bonds both got pretty much killed. So I think it's just, you have to be really careful of how much do I have that's safe? How much do I have that's growing? And is that the right mix on a go forward basis? And I'd say this strategy calls for a check on that probably at least annually, if not more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you love your job and
Yes.
you've expressed no interest whatsoever in retiring early. But if you did, how would you fill your time?
I think we've established in past episodes, I don't have kids, but I am very interested in pretty much all travel. I'm a big travel guy, so I'd say maybe my view of the overlap between fire and travel might come from that. And I kind of like destinations that are not super popular. Like I feel like if I was going to do that, I would try to go just maybe live in a slightly off the grid place, or maybe just a smaller town in a popular country for a month and see what I get into. And I would sure hope my wife would be interested in this.
Yeah.
So, Kason, if you're listening,
Yeah.
I promise I won't do this without your approval. But I'd say a lot of traveling. I am not a good golfer, but I would probably try to become a good golfer. Beyond that, I again, one of the reasons I work is because I enjoy it and I get fulfillment out of it.
Yeah.
So it's clear I need to find some new hobbies.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think being able to find fulfillment in your job is a great thing. And you bringing up, Kason being on board, it also makes you realize this is something that unless you are a single person, there has to be a lot of buy-in from your family, from your spouse, because if they're working full time and you're traveling the globe, it can create a difficult dynamic.
It absolutely can. And I would say that you might get some side eye at the Thanksgiving dinner table the first time, you bring up this
broach the
concept.
subject.
Yeah. Or that, what I really want to do, Dad, thanks for paying for my master's degree is wait tables in Italy
in Budapest.
Or Budapest.
Yeah.
The Pest pronunciation is important.
It's important.
Yeah.
You got to.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of challenges. It's a concept that has gotten popular and people are interested in. And so I think it's cool that we're kind of talking about some of the pros and cons to it today. But going back to the most important question, Hannah, what would you do if you fired, say, in the next 5 years?
I was worried you would ask me the same thing. Just like you, I think there's a lot of value in working. I think that working is a very grounding thing in a person's life. And so I can't imagine firing without then immediately finding something else to do that was essentially work. Maybe I'd make a lot more sourdough. I'd probably have a much bigger garden. I would obviously spend a lot of time with kids. But other than that, I think I would probably just end up basically back at a job somehow, some way.
Maybe the Hannah Gowdy branch of some business. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? I don't know. Some very interesting cinnamon sugar sourdough loaves.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of plans for sourdough, so maybe it's a bakery that she has in mind.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, thank you so much today for joining us on this very hot, fiery episode of the Personal Finance Project. If this content is interesting to you, go ahead and hit the like button or subscribe. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Personal Finance Project. This show would not exist without the help of our brilliant creative director, Kira Minifield. Kira, thank you for everything you do to keep this show running. On to the disclosures. This broadcast contains the current opinions of the hosts and are subject to change. The broadcast is provided for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice or recommendations. Investors should obtain professional advice before making investment decisions. This is not a complete analysis of every material fact regarding any company, industry, or security. The information has been obtained from sources we consider to be reliable but cannot guarantee their accuracy. Robert W. Baird & Co. Incorporated is not a legal or tax services provider, and you are strongly encouraged to seek the advice of the appropriate professional advisors before taking any action. For more information about any companies discussed, please contact Baird. Past performance is not indicative of future results, and diversification does not ensure a profit or protect against loss. All investments carry some level of risk, including loss of principal. An investment cannot be made directly in an index. Investors should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of a fund carefully before investing. This and other information is found in the prospectus and summary prospectus. For a prospectus, please contact your financial professional and read it carefully before investing. Annuities carry unique risks, including market risk, investment risk, and claims-paying abilities of the insurer. There may also be instances where a contract will pay out less than the premiums paid or expire within the lifetime of the insured. There may be penalties for early withdrawal, and they are not insured by the FDIC because they are insurance, not an investment. Investors should consider carefully information contained in the prospectus or, if available, the summary prospectus, including investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. You can request a prospectus by reaching out to your financial advisor. Please read the prospectus carefully before investing. Investment returns will fluctuate and are subject to market volatility, so that an investor's shares, when redeemed or sold, may be worth more or less than their original cost. Unlike mutual funds, shares of ETFs are not individually redeemable directly with the ETF. Shares of ETFs are bought and sold at market price, which may be higher or lower than the net asset value, NAV. Baird does not issue or underwrite mortgages and does not service mortgage lending services. Any references to mortgages in the financial services offerings are purely intended to convey an engagement in this holistic planning process, with this as one piece of the larger picture, which may or may not apply to all clients. This broadcast may not be reproduced without express permission of Robert W. Baird & Co., Incorporated.